Now, I'm going to jump off of this one a little bit and talk about how to do description well. And then we'll jump back onto it with some examples, okay? So that might help you a little bit better. So let's talk about description. Description, which also kind of blends with my third point, is one of those things that it's easy to overdo in a story, and you want to avoid overdoing it. The thing you want to do with description is you want to learn somehow to be shorter, meaning briefer, which is basically the same word, but brief means something different than short. Brief, I think that word kind of means you retain the content but do it in fewer words. So you want to be shorter / briefer. You want to be more concrete. And you want to focus your descriptions on things that do more than one thing. Okay?
What do you mean by do more than one thing?
I'll get to it. Don't worry. You want, and let's put on here as kind of a reminder, not really a point, but more of a reminder. We have 5 senses. Use more than just sight. Okay? So these should basically be your guiding principles for description. Brevity, concreteness, making your prose do heavy lifting for you by doing more than one thing, and remembering that you have multiple senses. Let's go down the list. Why is being shorter better?
Because you don't lose them.
Because you don't lose them. Okay, great answer. What else?
You can get on to the next awesome thing.
You can get on to the next awesome thing. Cool. Ooh, wow, that was way off. Okay. I don't know. It slipped. That's what I'm going to go with.
Keeps it from being boring.
Okay, keeps it from being boring.
Allows you to control your tone a little better. Makes you sound intelligent.
Okay, yeah.
It lets your audience use their imagination.
Okay. More imagination. Hey, I hit a shoulder. That's great. Reduces your word count. Okay.
Remember shorter descriptions. It makes it more applicable to that thing.
Okay, makes them more applicable because they're shorter. Okay, yeah.
Especially if we're doing market fiction and not literary fiction. Literary fiction is known for its big, like, epic poetic sentences, but you like trying to tell the story and the setting and moving the
Yeah.
forward.
Let's talk about a few things here. I've already thrown a bunch at you, so.
One.
Okay, there you go. Whoosh. Oh, hey. So let's talk about a few things here. These are all good things. But to boil it down, to be more brief, shorter and sweeter is going to have more impact. More impact is going to hold the reader to your story better. Holding the reader to your story better makes them continue going and makes them get more immersed in the story. All right? Nothing is worse. Okay, there are worse things. But hyperbolically, nothing is worse than a big, boring paragraph at the beginning of a book. Okay? You want to avoid this. And there are a couple things we'll talk about here. I'm going to write these up mostly as a reminder to me. We want to talk about learning curve. We want to talk about the pyramid of abstraction. Let's do with that. Learning curve. Learning curve is a challenge for us. What I mean by learning curve is when you pick up a book, you will have a learning curve, no matter what. You'll have to learn new names. You'll have to learn about characters. There are things you're going to have to learn and remember in order to keep track of this book. In a fantasy or science fiction book, our learning curve becomes more steep. Meaning, there's much more that people have to learn, and so we have to throw it at them faster. Okay? Learning curve is a challenge, but it's also an advantage. Most of us who read science fiction and fantasy are probably reading it because of, in part, the learning curve. It's more engaging to us. It's more imaginative because there's more going on we have to learn. We like it. We like that aspect. But at the same time, that learning curve creates a barrier of entry to the book because so many new names and things pile on top of a person that it can be very difficult to get going. How you manage your learning curve is a skill that's going to show off what you as a writer can do. And how you match it to your given genre is going to be very important. For instance, YA and middle grade, you're going to want to shoot for less of a learning curve, a shallower learning curve, okay? Usually, the lower your learning curve, the better. However, that said, there are some famous books out there that just expect you to deal with it. Anyone read Gardens of the Moon, Stephen Erickson? How's the learning curve on that book?
It's pretty steep.
It's brutal.
I didn't figure out the magic system till the book was over.
Yeah, it throws you right in the middle of things. Anytime you start in media res, it's going to raise your learning curve. And media res means we're in the middle of a sequence, like an action sequence or something like that. That can be good because your payoff for that is nice tension. But things are going everywhere. He just throws you in the middle of everything, and then there's like flashbacks too, and then there's like, no description of how things work. You're just expected to pick it up as you go along. And, his learning curve is kind of like bonk. It's like run into this wall and scramble up to it. Okay, then we'll be easy on you. And now it's ramping again. I mean, it is a really steep learning curve. It's probably the steepest learning curve I've seen in a contemporary science fiction fantasy novel. Now, shallower learning curves, there are a lot of things that you can do to shift this around. One thing you can do is to try and move some of your, some of your descriptions toward being shorter and more concrete, and trying to kind of shift as much of the world building to kind of as we go along as possible. Don't put it all in your first paragraph or your first page or even your first chapter. Things that you don't need yet, kind of shift them off and let us step into it so your learning curve doesn't do something like this unless you want it to. Okay? Other things that make learning curves less steep is the classic start in our world and get sucked into the fantasy world. Why does this make learning curve less steep?
They have to learn it too.
You already know our world.
You already know our world, and so you start off with them only having to learn the character, and then you add the world progressive step by step. But the fact that you already know our world helps with that a lot. It allows you to ease into things. This is one of the reasons why it's so prominent in middle grade, is it really helps with the learning curve.
And the character who gets into it has to learn it.
Yes, then you have a Watson character. The Watson character is a separate but kind of on top of the same thing. The Watson character is a character who doesn't know about what's going on, and so the narrative has a good reason to explain it to them. It's another great way to ease your learning curve by having somebody, if the character's confused, you feel all right being confused. Does that make sense? If the character's like, I don't know what's happening, but all I know is I need to get over there and stay away from this thing chasing me, when you read the character say that to you, you're like, all right, I'm on board. I know we need to get over there and not get eaten. I can deal with that. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the problems that I see when you don't have someone go from our world to a fantasy world is you don't have analogous things to use in your descriptions. You can't say, like,
Yeah.
it was as big as a gnarly, you just make up, like,
Right.
They're not even going to know what you're talking about unless
Yeah.
they're from our world.
Yeah, it can be a real challenge to come up with, and this is why the really, really, really different fantasy world or science fiction world can be extremely challenging to write. Because you can't even say it's as big as an orange, because they don't have oranges. And so this is one of the reasons why fantasy books, I think, also tend to only step it so far and how different the world is. And this just depends on what type of story, what type of book you want to write. Yeah.
Is that why you still have horses in all these worlds that have totally different geographies and totally different stuff?
Yeah, yeah, it's one of the reasons why you have horses anyway. And yeah. A lot of the books you're going to find in-world reasons that you do. A lot of them, like you'll find that they're Far Future Lost Colony. Like Pern is Far Future Lost Colony, which is why they're humans on this planet that there really shouldn't be humans on.
Specifically with Pern, for a lot of those books, Anne McCaffrey has this big prologue kind of
Yeah.
saying, this is how they got to that planet, all the things you need to know to, enjoy the story.
That
What do you
was
feel about
much
that?
more common back in the day. David Eddings did a lot of that too. Nowadays, we don't do it as much. I think we've found better ways to do it, and we've kind of learned learning curve much better. You don't see the big expository prologue anymore because people realize that a lot of people are just skipping them because they're boring. That said, Most of the Pern ones was like 3 paragraphs, and so it was a pretty good way to do it. And I have a fondness for all the old David Eddings prologues, but looking back, I'm like, man, those don't let you start the story at all. You'd have to grind. You get this book, and you're like, all right, I have to grind through this world-building lesson, and then I can start reading my story. People who grew up reading those then assume they do that, but now the fiction has kind of literally learned to do it better ways, and you don't see those happening nearly as often. The editors are on the watch for people who can do it without doing that. Okay? So, how you do it without doing that comes into your description. Okay? You're going to want to make it shorter, briefer, and you're going to want to focus it. What you do is you want to dole out the information as it becomes strictly relevant. Okay? Instead of, we begin our book, people are chatting, and then you're like, big block of text to explain where they are. You want to try and shrink this down to 1 line as part of the conversation, if you can. You can't always, but you want to try and say, what is the really relevant information for right now? What can I move to later about this world building? And is there a way I can structure and format my scene so that the rest of this can be chopped up into little chunks and be distributed throughout the first 3 chapters instead of putting it right there? If you do this, the editors you're gonna have a hard time getting the editors past the first page. If you do this anywhere in the first chapter, you're gonna have a little bit of trouble. That's not to say you can't do a couple of lines here and there, but you want to try and move it to a couple of lines here and there. And this is a really tough thing to do in epic fantasy. I will tell you right now that there's basically no getting away from doing it somewhat. But if you can learn to do these kinds of things to kind of temper what's going on, you'll find that you hold the reader's attention more. And that's why we'll talk about the pyramid of abstraction right now.